Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Frontrunners Innovate. You have a very familiar face, which we'll get to him in a minute. This is Ambassador Richard Swett. And then our new face, Catherine Griffin. And boy, if you are in the impact world, you're going to be so excited that you landed on this conversation today, because she is someone you definitely want to have in your network and get to know. When Catherine and I first had a conversation, the one thing that hit me was thank God, somebody finally cracked that code on how to do the impact money thing. And so she has figured out how to kind of close the gap on the money and the data that's needed to get that profit and that purpose put together. And that is all rolled into a company that she has founded called ImpactableX Analytics. And you're going to learn more about her and that, but just to know a little bit about her background, she is Techstars 23 alum, as well as a Tory Burch Fellow and a Fast Company 2021 World Changer. So you're in good company with Catherine Griffin. So I'm going to turn things over to my co-host, Ambassador Richard Swett, right now, who you'll get to understand why he is my co-host today in about a minute. We're going to then turn our attentions toward Catherine and find out a little bit more about her and ImpactableX Analytics. Okay, so Ambassador Swett.
Thank you, Mary. It is always a pleasure to be on any of these interviews or even in just a conversation with you. So I think I'm going to benefit more from this than probably the two of you combined. But thank you for letting me participate. And Catherine, it's a pleasure meeting you. A little bit about myself. I was trained originally as an architect at Yale University, graduated, practiced architecture. I've done skyscrapers, I've done single family homes. But I became very interested in passive architecture, passive energy architecture, and became very interested in building communities that centered on local fuel sources that within a 40-mile radius would meet those needs in the Northeast. That taught me a little bit about how the energy sector was controlled by the oil and gas industries, not to the best use of energy resources and renewable resources and impacts on the environment. And so I started looking for ways to do these kinds of projects in the US. Couldn't find success here because of the fragmentation of the building industry, and ended up in Africa, of all places, seeing a need, seeing a way that I could help build new communities, build new jobs, new economies for these locations all across the African continent. And we're working very closely now in Malawi and Nigeria. We were in Sudan, but that place has fallen apart and is a real mess, and it's unfortunate, but we're waiting for things to settle down there once again. But right now we have a project in Malawi that we're very excited about. We're employing feasibility studies, and we hope to begin the project in full earnest within the next 6 months. So that's me. But one of the things, I guess, the way that I can segue this, Catherine, is what we have found that is over the last 50 years, over $3 trillion has been invested in Africa. Unsustainable. Nothing shows any form of sustainability based on this. My partner, Michael Rowan, and I have a model that we believe is a sustainable model that creates ownership at the base of the economic pyramid, puts that money down at the base, allows people to own shares in the companies that come in. The companies that we are bringing in are US foreign direct investors that are interested in establishing a beachhead on the continent of Africa, which is just wide open waiting for this opportunity. But what we are looking for is really hard to convince investors and whatnot to give up. And that is, we're looking for people who are willing to let the people at the bottom of the economic pyramid make that investment. Once they have that, they're motivated to get up and go to work in the fields, work in the greenhouses, which we use as part of our economic assembly. But all of these things we know establish the desire to work on a sustainable basis because we've done it in Alaska. Michael helped set up the Alaskan tribal corporations, which were part of the Alaskan Tribal Lands Reclamation Act that was passed as legislation to help them benefit from a small bit of money that was coming out of the northern slope with the development of the oil industry. And so that kind of investment given to the people in the tribal communities has created a indigenous growth and economic prosperity that in one generation moved them from below the poverty line into the middle and upper middle class, and going forward from there to the extent that over the last 40 years or so, it's been an increase in tribal wealth of over $160 billion. That's the kind of growth we want to see established in Africa. That's the kind of sustainable development we feel that can be done in Africa using this model as our template. And so if you have people who are looking to invest in that kind of operation, we would love to talk to them. But first, tell us about what got you into this whole impact area, and how have you established your niche, and what are you doing to develop your impact in these projects?
Well, thank you, Ambassador. And Mary, thank you so much for having me here today for this important conversation. Ambassador, that is quite a compelling project, and your experience in Africa, I think, is one I've seen quite a bit. We work with a number of organizations across the continent and impact investors on the other side of the table. And our role is to really provide outcomes intelligence, some insight into what's possible with capital deployed to help inform those capital allocation decisions and unlock money from the sidelines. To answer your question, I got into this when I ran a fund for about 10 years based here in Philadelphia. We worked with hundreds of early stage social entrepreneurs across impact verticals. I joined just as we won a prize from Bloomberg Philanthropies to partner with the City of Philadelphia, the Wharton Social Impact Initiative, and Bloomberg to essentially mobilize, accelerate, and deploy new technologies that could address the city, Philadelphia's urban challenges. So we ran two cohorts of 10 companies focused on all kinds of challenges that the city was grappling with at the time. As we wrapped that program, we then connected with the Obama administration, which was issuing broad call to action in the absence of climate legislation at the time for a variety of resources, human, financial, data, technological, and our role, similarly to the Bloomberg project, was to leverage those resources and channel them towards really high growth startup companies that could make use of them in actionable ways. What happened was our partners at both Bloomberg and Obama started asking just very basic questions. How much impact can we actually expect from investing so much in these companies? Similar questions, I suspect, to the ones some of the investors you're talking to may have. And so we sat down with the founders. We asked them very simple questions about their impact. They struggled to answer them, despite the fact that this was why they had left their roles at LinkedIn and Facebook. Were reallocating their time and expertise. And so in the absence of alternatives, we developed our own. After looking around to resources we could offer them, we really found that the resources available were designed for public companies, for corporates, and focused primarily on ESG, right? Risk mitigation or internal operational practices. And while questions around, board and team diversity are important, your procurement policies, these are important questions. The companies we were talking to were rather small still, and it was their products and services. It was that sort of quote unquote interventions that they were going to be rolling out that could really affect change on some really hairy, difficult challenges. And so that's what we wanted to help them understand and engineer and then articulate effectively to all of their stakeholders, but investors in particular, who by definition are buying into a future state, right? And so can we help these companies articulate their impact potential in the same way that they forecast their financials?
Were you measuring these impacts based on comparisons with a private sector, straight up capital investment program, or were you working in social improvement aspects that had impacts on social aspects of the community that was being supported in these different kinds of projects? I'm curious to understand, because in my experience, it's very difficult to establish any kind of a sustainable community that is anything but a private sector driven development. The minute you begin to put into that program the benefits, social benefits, if you will, of things that have to do with the right mix of people, the right amounts of economic assistance, those things really eat away at a community's ability and sense of need to make the bottom line be the sustaining number.
In my experience, it's both. The local communities need to be bought in, and there needs to be financial incentives, right?
How do you do that?
Well, it depends on the nature of the project.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean how do we measure that, or how do you
Yes.
design a project? Well, we first just look at what's true. It sort of depends on, it's difficult to talk about it in the hypothetical, but we'll, look at the nature of the project and the number of people who benefit. So whenever we worked with an organization,
Yeah.
we build impact models that sit on top of business models or organization models. So
Mm-hmm.
you can have multiple models if you sell multiple products, or in your case, design multiple projects, or if you
Mm-hmm.
design or sell one product into different geographic markets or buyer segments that have different profiles, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
the same project installed in Malawi might look very different from its impact in Botswana, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we set up these models to be geographically specific, demographically specific, and product or service specific. From there, we identify what the key metrics are, what the theory of change is. What is the nature of the problem? What is the nature of the intervention? What are the outputs or activities that are being done, the data that can be touched and collected tangibly from that project? And
Mm-hmm.
then, and this is where we tend to differ, what are the outcomes? What are the results of that intervention? And what is the systemic change that can happen over time? Then from there, we are able to actually, well, you can start with estimates, but to the degree that you have data, we collect that data and then we can predict and quantify and contextualize outcomes. So, like, you might know the number of people who are employed by a certain project or served by a certain project, but that doesn't necessarily mean its impact, right? Those folks might have been employed or served just fine without you. And so, what is that actual change that's happening? And then what happens as a result of that change?
Can
These
you give us a description,
Case
a
study.
simple description of the
Sure,
project?
I
I
would be
think that
happy
would be
to.
very helpful.
I think so too. I find that talking about these things in the hypothetical can make people scratch their heads sometimes. So, one of the case studies I like to talk about in the United States, though, happy to share some others, is a for-profit company that uses drones to detect and contain wildfires. Huge problem out in California, as we all know. And so, what the thesis is, the theory of change is that these drones can detect and contain wildfires more quickly than standard tactics. And
Mm-hmm.
so, we'll look in California, or from a model design perspective, we'll look right in California. We can also look at the US as a whole, and we'll compare on one key catalytic metric, which is time required to detect and contain a wildfire. So tell us how many hours are required to detect and contain a wildfire using drones. Let's say it's 1,000 per wildfire. Then compare that to how long it would take without your solution. Research says, now this can be research informed, it can also be obviously data as the gold standard. So when you're
Yeah.
onboarding new customers, this is a great question to ask. How long does it typically take you to detect and contain a wildfire? We found that there's a 250-hour savings, time savings. We can then use that to predict and quantify outcomes. So as a result of the 250-hour savings, we know that you can reduce property damage and associated property damage costs. We know that you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We'll
Mm-hmm.
always translate impact into economic value. So in this case, we look at the social cost of carbon, which is a very inclusive way of valuing
Mm-hmm.
each ton of carbon emitted. We'll look at wildfire smoke exposure and the associated hours of productivity or job time on the job lost, right? We'll look
Mm-hmm.
at lives saved. And so we can predict these kinds of outcomes all from one metric, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
translate it into economic value. And this is just for one wildfire. If we then look at how many wildfires are served over a year or over 5 years, we can forecast out on top of an organization's growth estimates, sales and revenue projections for for-profit companies. And because we translate impact into economic value, we can now aggregate impact across apples and oranges metrics and outcomes, right? You can't add up, reduced wildfire smoke exposure with reduced greenhouse gas emissions, with reduced property damage, right? Like apples and oranges outcomes. But
Hmm.
because we translate them all, we denominate them all in a dollar value, we can now aggregate at an annual level and across multiple years. And so suddenly you now have a total impact value over a term, a given term. And once you have that total impact value, now you can look at the ratio between impact value and revenue, and impact value and capital. So
Hmm.
a founder or an executive director, a leader, can go to a funder and say, for every dollar or euro or pound or rand or whatever, right?
Wherever you are in the world. Yes.
Wherever you are in the world that you invest in our organization, we can multiply that by 20x or 200x or 2000x in impact value. And this is how that breaks down. And so
Hmm.
this is all just from an organization's perspective, but it's so interesting then if you're sitting at the other side of the table and you have 20, 50, 100 organizations coming to you looking for capital, making claims of this compelling impact. How do you know who to believe? How do you know where to allocate your capital? If you narrow it down to 10 and you give each of those 10 organizations $1 million, is one going to X their impact and another is going to 10x their impact, right? How do you understand the relative efficiency of a business model as a lever for impact? And then allocate your capital to the organizations that have the most efficient business models, right? Or can maximize for both financial returns and impact returns. These are the kinds of insights that I think we need to be relying on as investors and as operators to build and invest in the organizations that can drive lasting scalable change. But this kind of insight just doesn't exist right now. And so that's what we're really here to change.
Well, I'll tell you, I was going to say, who are your competitors? Because in my long time of experience, I have not come across anyone
Yeah.
like yourself to a great extent. I mean, Mary is one, I am one. I would call your vision is the vision of an integrator. In other words, you're constantly look. I'm an architect, so I look at a building not in terms of the facade. I look at it in terms of all the pieces that went together to make that facade. And that's what you're seeing, is that you're seeing what are all the different components that make the example that you gave, the drone observation for fire suppression work, or what are all of those components that ultimately make that economically viable. We have in this time of humanity, we have specialized to such a degree that we've lost track of the context that we're in. And you're trying to bring that back. And you can only do that by measuring, as you say, measuring each of the different components and then amalgamating their total impact, not as well, I guess the saying that best represents what you're doing and what we're trying to do is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Mm.
And the math therefore works to a greater extent, but you still have to somehow figure out how to convince the investor that that's where the money really needs to be put, because it's going to have, as you say, the 10x, the 2x, the 20x, the greater impact on that project and on the pocketbook of the investor where the money is coming from.
That was
I,
one of my questions, Catherine, is I don't know how long you've been doing this, but I would say, what is the early on feedback from maybe the investor side of the table? Are you getting good feedback from them on what you're offering?
I would say
With
from the looks of this, Mary, she's been doing this since high school.
no,
But
very young. Yes.
but
well,
I'm curious to hear the answer.
I've been doing this for about 7 years now in a variety of different capacities, right? So this first started as sort of a services
Yeah.
project. We've since launched software. Mary, you mentioned that we were part of Techstars, so on the heels of that, we were able to launch software. And now we're developing V3 where we're really embedding AI, which is very exciting to me because it's going to allow us to offer this at a much reduced cost. We do a lot.
Hmm.
I spend a lot of time talking to founders and investors in emerging markets. And while you could argue that the need for this is most acute there, the ability to pay for something like this is often a challenge. And so I'm very excited to be able to offer this more widely at a fraction of our current costs. Though right now we really are very competitive from a financial perspective.
One of the things that I'm curious to hear about from you is you've talked about a technological application. When you start dealing with people, it gets a little messier. The technology might work in a more predictable way. Yes, it breaks down and whatnot, but when you're dealing with a whole population, when you're trying to build a community of 10,000 people, one of the things that we are trying to develop is the ability, well, what we call is a prosperity platform, which in essence combines the architecture and engineering software so that you can build your environment in your computer. But then you've got to fill it with avatars. You've got to fill it with people, and the computer people, the avatars that you create. What are you basing that population's experience on? Well, we go out and we do surveys of 10,000 people and try to figure out how to predict these people. First of all, who should live in this community, who will become the leaders, how will they make that community work. But also you've got to figure out what are their needs, what are their employment abilities. All of these things we're trying to put into the prosperity platform so that you can start running the community in the computer before you actually build it on the ground. And with AI coming on like a like a herd of elephants, we are trying to grapple with how does all that information go into that AI platform and get arranged so that we not only can predict how the buildings and the infrastructure stands up over time, but how do people prosper through the use of that infrastructure? How do they live in those communities? How do their businesses operate in those spaces? And that is tells me is that's something that your group would be very, very interested in because it's in essence doing exactly what you were just talking about.
Sounds like a very complex use case, Ambassador. You're really drawing, it sounds like you're really designing a community from scratch.
Yes.
What we,
Well,
Yes.
yes.
yeah, I'm eager to learn more. I mean, I think the future is best predicted by history, right? We look for as much indication of what will happen from research, from peer-reviewed academic studies as much as possible, from actual data, right? You've got a number of confounding variables here. And I'm
Mhm.
not sure if something like the project you've designed has been done before. Um,
Well, that's an interesting question. You're familiar with Masdar, the very expensive $60 billion community that's being built in the Gulf states. It is a city from scratch, but it has so far failed miserably, as have many of these, because what they're doing is they're building rich cities, expensive cities, I should say, for rich people. And what we're doing is we're trying to create a community for 10,000 people that are living in the bush, that have no jobs, that live hand to mouth in subsistence farming or whatever it is. And we're trying to build into that agriculture and industry and all the other components that make for a workable community that can not only sustain itself, but through sustaining itself, grow and increase in value. And each of the members of that community have a share that they have that grows with the value of the community. So they ultimately become wealthy, not because they earn a decent salary or a decent wage, but because they own a decent share that increases in value. Because what we're finding is that poverty is really caused not by the minimal wage or lack of wage, but it's more caused from the fact that people aren't able to leverage their credit to invest in bigger and better operations. And so with this kind of a share ownership in what's going on in that community, they can make those investments. They can leverage and do an addition to their home. They can leverage and do an augmentation to their business. They can leverage and do whatever they feel would benefit them, but it gives them that opportunity that they don't have currently.
It sounds really exciting.
It's, and also, like you mentioned, that we have other, locations that he's looking at in primarily Africa, but it makes me ask you the question too. Some of the projects that you get involved in, are you mostly in the United States, or have you gotten broader in scope as far as the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we work with organizations and funds globally. In fact, Africa is increasingly our major market.
How many projects are you working on currently, and how many do you look at and set aside, and how many of those ultimately come back to the table and are pursued? I'd be very curious. What's the size of your operation and the capacity of the project?
Basically asking, how do you choose what you're going to work
Yeah.
on?
Well, I mean, look, we try to work with as many organizations as we possibly can, right? So we work with funds of funds around the world and impact funds that are deploying, in direct investments. We have about 13 funds we're working with right now. I would
Okay.
say about 100 different companies or organizations. Some of those are portfolio companies of the funds we're working with.
Hmm.
Some are not and come to us independently.
And when you say come to you independently, is the line at your door, or are you out searching for and trying to find the appropriate companies and individuals to meet your requirements?
It's a
Hmm.
combination. We've got lots of folks that get referred to us, which is always my favorite because it's just such a vote of confidence from our
Hmm.
current customers. And then there are others that we meet along the way, at conferences, or my team will hear about something that they're doing and reach out and say, we'd love to explore, an opportunity to collaborate or support your work.
How big is your team?
It's rather small. We're still quite an early stage company, so
Hmm.
there are 5 or 6 of us at any given time. We have some fractional help and some contractors that support on development and AI
Hmm.
and things. And then those of us that are leading day to day the work to find and serve new clients.
And you're trying to match the investment group with the project or company or people who are searching for that money for investment. What do you need? You're looking for very different things on each side of that coin, if you will. On the investment side, you're looking for people who have the sufficient funds, but also the ability to understand the kind of investment that will have the biggest impact. So I would assume that there is a kind of profile of that investor that you're looking for that's specific. On the investment side, you're looking for, again, a profile of a project or a technology that you feel that would be attractive to the investor. So how do you set those profiles, and are there common denominators for both? Are there common aspects on each of the side that are different from the other? I'm just very curious how you build those profiles and find the match points where you can bring them together.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, look, we're not looking to match them, but we're
Hmm.
working with investors or fund portfolio managers who have an impact mandate, who have designed and mounted their fund to deliver financial returns and impact returns. That's what LPs have bought into, which is, by the way, an increasing trend as
Hmm.
Yes.
younger generations take over generational wealth. And so our job is to help inform the allocation of that capital during the due diligence process. Can this company actually do what it says it can do? How
Hmm.
does its impact potential compare to the rest of your portfolio? And then track that impact over time to see to what degree its claims or its projected impact actualizes, and then report on that impact to LPs. And then on the organization side, folks will come to us either to preempt questions that they're expecting from investors, and they, really want to work with impact capital, values aligned capital, sometimes more patient capital, but investors who have resources that can help their organization scale more quickly and really deliver on their impact mandate. They're also coming to us, though, because they want to articulate more clearly their value proposition for potential customers and their marketing base, right? So, like, when your intervention, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, whether it's a product or a service, when you can improve outcomes or drive resource efficiency or increase access to resources, this is often why an investor invests or a customer buys from you. And so to the degree that you can articulate the degree to which you can do these things, you can support your, sales efforts and your marketing efforts and your fundraising efforts. And so we'll have operators come to us for that purpose as well, regardless of any investor request or requirement. And so, our job isn't to sort of match, it's to unveil what's true based off of what the data and research say, and then be a resource, a strategic resource, and a source of clarity when maybe there are conflicting variables in a decision, and to really help bring transparency to what can often be a very emotional decision. We're trying to bring proof points, where a lot of decisions can be informed by good vibes, good intentions.
So are you making a commission, or are you a participant in the project? What's your revenue model, and how does that ultimately reward you for the good work that you're doing?
Yeah, so we'll charge a fee for every analysis we do. So on the organization or company side, can be a one-time thing. If you need
Hmm.
to report regularly, of course, we have a platform, and so that's a subscription fee. And then on the investor side, we'll charge per company with volume-based pricing. So the more companies we analyze, the lower the cost for each. Now,
Hmm.
AI may change this. We're planning to roll out our first version by the end of the year, where, we'll allow an investor to model as many interventions companies as they'd like. So our pricing model may change, but right now we charge per analysis.
I see.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, guys, we need to kind of wrap this up, but what I wanted to do
You're kidding. That
is
was the fastest interview I've been at.
I
What I
know, but
find.
there's so many questions, and I think there's probably more. But I wanted to give Catherine an opportunity to tell us. You said that you're kind of still in the young stage of your company. Other than the AI component that I know is exciting, and I didn't realize it was coming so fast. Where do you see yourself in about another year? Where do you see your company going? What's the direction?
Thank you for that question, Mary. I mean, look, we want to
And,
be.
and I would say take it out 5 years. Go a year
Okay.
and then 5 years. That was exactly my last question that I
Okay.
was waiting. So, Mary, great minds think alike.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, look, we want to be sort of the back office resource for anyone looking to make an impact, right? So
Mhm.
you can sign up with us and easily access all of the resources you need to build your organization, for profit or nonprofit, make investment decisions or funding decisions, access new LPs, access new investors, access deal flow, right? Connect with additional data collection resources, right? So we're this sort of analytics engine. We're this sort of central hub into which you can feed data from a variety of different sources. We want to be a source of connection to those different sources, right? Geospatial satellite technology or new AI tools that are collecting data from folks on the ground. We want to be the back end resource that allows you to focus on doing what you do best, to deploying new solutions, deploying new capital, and will enable you to move more quickly and more intelligently along the way, and hopefully access all of the resources that you need. Right now, there can be a real gap, especially in the US,
What's the cause of that gap?
well, the political environment and economic situation is rather challenging for a lot of folks. Funding is just not getting out the door. And so we want to be a source of opportunity for the organizations that can demonstrate, actually prove that the impact they think they can have is real. And I think that those organizations should be able to access the resources they need anytime they need it. And so we want to be the platform that does that.
Think you're on your
Great.
way. Yeah, I think you're on your way. Well, this has been quite an eye-opening conversation, more so than even the short time that we had together, Catherine, before. I think this is terrific, and I feel like there's more conversation to come. But Ambassador Swett, thank you as always for
You're
jumping
welcome as
in.
always. As I said,
Yeah.
as always, I'm the one who benefits the most, and a phone call to Catherine will reveal that. Thank
Well, hang
you.
on with me. And Catherine, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing so much wonderful information. This is terrific for, like, as you said, not just the nonprofit and the impact-oriented folks that feel like that social enterprise is really what they're all about, but even those who have products and services for the private business side of things. So I see this really going places, and I agree with you. It's so needed. And I'm really excited to maybe connect back, maybe do a re-interview in about another year and see what that AI has done for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, for all of us actually.
Mary,
So
thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful conversation.
yeah, more to come for sure. So for all of you that are watching or listening, we will put her LinkedIn profile, website information, and along with Ambassador Swett's and Climate Prosperity Enterprise Solutions, name of his business. And so we'll put all that below so that you can access that. Till next time, happy front running. Bye bye.